Gender-based violence, one of the most pervasive human rights violations in the world, has extended to online spaces, where it's amplified and it's evolving in both overt and covert ways. In fact, technology, it can allow harassers to more easily organize. It lowers financial barriers to committing acts of gender-based violence, and anonymity can at times embolden users. While AI and other emerging technologies are creating new threats for perpetrators, such as non-consensual deepfake images, and it lowers the barriers to things like doxing and cyber harassment. And a few statistics I'm sure many in this room are aware. 58% of girls and young women have experienced some form of online harassment. 85% of women who spend time online have witnessed digital violence against other women. LGBTQIA+ people, women with disabilities, and women of color face disproportionately higher rates of online abuse. And 73% of women journalists have experienced online violence in the course of their work. However, this does not have to be our future. There are actions we can take, both social and technical, policies that can be enacted to change this. Technology-facilitated gender-based violence doesn't have to be our destiny. We do have the power to unfollow misogyny. So at Spotlight Initiative, we work with social media influencers to make the digital world safer. And here's a recent activation from Liv Pearsall that frames today's discussion.
I have some facts that I'm going to share. Am I the only person that loves a good, interesting fact? A 2021 study said Instagram's algorithm showed 70% more content related to appearance, like beauty, makeup, cosmetics, blah, 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 to teenage girls than boys. Surprising? I think not. 72% of girls report feeling pressured by social media to look or act a certain way. I know I relate. A 2023 study said that girls who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media are twice as likely to suffer from mental health issues, depression, anxiety, etc., etc. Over 3 hours a day, guilty. I say that to say we're together in this. I am one of aforementioned girly pops. So those facts were more around body image, mental health, right? Now I want to talk safety and exploitation. We're gonna bring the tone down a little bit, all right? This is real stuff. A 2023 study said 96% of all deep fake videos online were non-consensual pornography. Over 90% of the victims, women. 58% of girls aged 14 to 17 have received unsolicited sexual content from strangers online. I have a feeling maybe that a lot of the girlies watching this right now are like, yep, I believe that. Which is, I'll just say it, very sad. One more for you guys. By age 11, 53% of children have been exposed to explicit content online. Children. So why am I sharing this? I'm not trying to scare you, but I'm trying to share something that I am passionate about as an internet creator and as a woman. That is that the internet doesn't really have guardrails right now. You with me? Are you tracking? Same way we're trying to build a safer outside world for girls and women, we need to do that in the digital world too.
All right, so to interrogate this topic further, and it is good to see that the discussion is making it into the online forums themselves. But to interrogate this topic further, we're now going to move to our panel discussion. All right. All right, so we'll have one to share. We are family at this point. Okay, so my first question to Alexandra. So where are the biggest, and it's kind of a loaded question, a few parts. Where are the biggest current and emerging threats online? How is technology-facilitated gender-based violence impacting women's participation, both in various areas of life, online and offline? And finally, based on your experience and your work at UNFPA, which programs and technical solutions have actually been the most effective at combating this issue?
Well, I think I could talk to that for hours, but I mean, so much of the harm we just saw before, like I think really that's a snapshot of what we're seeing. I think what I'm most concerned about is, I think, one, we can't have this conversation without thinking about AI. and we're talking about reproducing and amplifying existing gender inequalities because of the data that AI is being trained on. And I think as that increasingly becomes a prevalent part of all of our lives, we need to be thinking about how do we diversify those data sets. And there's some incredible work globally that is happening around that. I think it's about bringing it together and working through how to create feminist AI, stop the mantra of tech for good and start talking about proving tech for good. So I think that's a really key concern. The other one is, and it's often left off when we talk about TFGBV, we're often talking about online platforms, we're talking about TikTok and Facebook, for example, but increasingly we're seeing a rise in the Internet of Things. We're seeing locking devices, Bluetooth locking devices, cars that have perimeter settings on them so women couldn't escape if they wanted to, location tracking surveillance, which is very, very cheap, accessible, and and a key way in which we're seeing coercive control manifest. And I guess that brings me to, when we talk about TFGBV, it's not just in the digital world. There is, that the causes, the drivers of TFGBV are exactly the same as GBV at large. But what we're seeing is this online-offline continuum of violence, and we really need to think about how do we address this issue as gender-based violence? How do we integrate all of our work in around tech-facilitated GBV within existing programming, policies, movement building? It's about how do we bring that together? How do we bring the language of digital rights movements, which have been around for a very long time? There have been feminist technologists and feminist digital rights activists and who are here at SVRI. They've been in this space for a really long time, but GBV practitioners and movements aren't making those connections necessarily, and I think that's a really important piece of our work. And I think, speaking of what's working in programming, that convening that space where we're bringing those voices together, bringing those different languages together so we can understand each other, I think has been a key success for UNFPA. We've held 2 TFGBV global symposiums. The last symposium we hosted in February, we had 44 speakers, 27 different countries, digital rights, as well as GBV practitioners talking about what those best practices were. And some of those are programs like, You Right Cis, which is a program in Central Australia working with Indigenous communities, fantastic prevention programming, really demonstrating some good results. Around the response space, I'm really happy we're joined by Chen. Some really, really strong support for women experiencing TFGBV embedded into broader GBV case management systems. So I think I might stop there. I'm conscious of the expertise on the panel here, but thank you.
No, those are some vital responses, and it's interesting. I'm glad that you tapped into the Internet of Things. So whether that's cars or emerging devices, we're going to have glasses and things, because in the cyber world, we have a term for this. It's called attack surfaces. The more technology comes into our lives, the more opportunities for attacks. Unfortunately, we don't have these same terms, or they don't cross over into the human rights world. And that's a problem. We shouldn't just think about hackers for businesses, but what about people? So my next question is for you, Amanda. So based on your fierce and your effective advocacy around the world, how has the online environment shaped your experience, and then at times perhaps made things a bit more challenging? And what do you think people may not realize about the difficulties advocates and survivors continue to face in these digital spaces?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be here in solidarity with everyone in Cape Town. I am an activist because I am a rape survivor, and I'm also an astronaut. And so I'll speak about the duality of that in my experience on the online world. Technology is such a double-edged sword, and something you said really resonated with me, which is that algorithms aren't neutral. I'll talk about the good part first. One of the first times in which I advocated for my rights, it was many hours of me talking to politicians who did not care. Now, in the United States, the context was that my evidence, rape evidence, was routinely destroyed by the United States government without being tested, and I needed to save that evidence to preserve my justice. And I talked to politicians who said, this isn't going to help me get reelected, I sympathize for you, but it's a no. And so I turned to the online world. I asked people to sign petitions and to call in. And in the US, there are legislative cycles where at a certain deadline, if you don't pass your bill by then, you have to start all over. So just come with me for a moment to this moment where it was the day before the deadline was due. So the bill had to pass, or I had to start all over. And I got a call from the political advisor saying, hey, the speaker's not going to bring up your bill for a vote. And I was devastated, but it was other survivors online who saw what I was doing, reached out, and in solidarity said, hey, we're going to call in, and why don't you go there and show up in person, stand outside of the State House and force them to have to see your face as they walk out of the floor. And for many hours the next day, I watched their phones go and ring because online people had seen the message and called in. And at the end of the day, the speaker brought it up for a vote, and it passed unanimously. That's how I was able to get my rights. So that's the good part. Now, after a decade of advocating online, I've gotten my fair share of trolls, but I have never seen the vitriol as I have since sharing my story plus announcing that I'm going to space. And this combination of succeeding in a male-dominated area while also talking about vulnerability and gender-based violence has fueled a very interesting type of trolling that honestly I'm still trying to deal with. I remember that when I'm sharing my story, sometimes the algorithm will block it, and it was quite painful because they couldn't differentiate between hate speech and between a survivor sharing their story. And now we've seen many survivors, when they talk about their story, have to censor themselves in a way. So they don't say the word rape, right? Or they don't even say sexual assault. It's actually a new kind of language. Sub-language that has evolved around trying to speak our truth, but also trying not to be censored. So, it was very painful when I shared my story and then Meta blocked it. And we had to advocate to get the censorship removed because the algorithm did get it wrong. So I find it both a very powerful tool that can do good, but also that we're navigating this new world. And I'm grateful that Meta was able to remove it, but of course that was a tax, right? That all survivors do feel, because quite frankly, the viewership on Reels, on TikTok, that equates to monetary value. And when you censor it, it literally is a tax on how many views, thus how much we get paid.
And I think it's important to point out the inherent power structure and who gets to classify what terms are considered safe, appropriate, beneficial, the power to classify anything, right? Categories of race, of gender. That's an inherent power structure that is emerging in the world of technology that we have to pay attention to. Reverend, so the reality is that men need to be at the center of this conversation. They need to be leading the change. You have conducted national dialogues with men on gender equality, gender-based violence. You've been working closely with traditional and with religious leaders, as well as civil society partners, to develop the National Gender Machinery Working Group on Men and Gender Equality. So what key learnings from these initiatives can be applied globally? And how do we get men not only to refrain from committing acts of gender-based violence, whether online, offline, but to become advocates and champions for this cause?
Thank you very much. Sorry. Well, I think first we need to be careful about the language we use. I'm not an English first language person, but it seems to me when we say centering, we're assuming somebody's on the margins. And I would have preferred that we forge alliances as men with women, because this struggle against gender-based violence, women has been leading for many years. But as we all know, women don't violate themselves. The bigger question then is, how do we bring men as allies in this effort to turn the tide against gender-based violence. I think it's important that when we do that, it must be framed accordingly, because as men, we are born privileged. And when we come to spaces, we expect to lead. We expect to take over, because that's how we are socialized as well. And in our approach as Sonke Gender Justice and Men Engage is we argue that this work must be framed within a human rights framework. It must be feminist in approach. It must acknowledge the role that women play so that it is appropriately, guided and not to, as it were, take over, because then we will undo the good work that women have done over many years. So we see ourselves more as allies in holding ourselves as men accountable. As one of the problems, of course, we live in a patriarchal world. Many of these behaviors that we exhibit as men are encouraged by patriarchy. We are socialized with norms that say we control women, we control women's bodies, we always have to be in charge. And so there's a lot that we need to do to undo that, to re-educate men, to say, after all, men, we are just as human as everybody else. We are also as vulnerable to our own demons, if you like, so that we can be able to square up and face our own selves and our behaviors in the mirror to see what we are doing to other fellow human beings and find different pathways of acting differently. And I think that is possible. But part of that is to acknowledge that we are, after all, living in a world that always accords us, this privilege. I find it interesting from, my fellow colleagues who have just weighed in now, that the social media space is very eager to stop women's voices that talk about their stories and want to give, what is happening in their lives. But it's not as eager to stop those that attack and demonize and, almost seek to embarrass women using pornography as a form of revenge against women, all of that. It's interesting to me, and I think one of the things that we also try to do is to challenge these social network providers to say if the algorithms can pick up when people talk about rape, about how they've been violated and stop it, why is it difficult for the algorithms to stop men who are violating women? So it's about power, in essence. It's about control, because obviously who owns these social media networks? On the main, it's owned by men. And on the main, it's all about money and profits. Concerns by women and women's lives and women's health are not a priority in this scheme of things, because it doesn't form the bottom line. But I think that's a myopic view of looking at the world, because we have a world that if we indeed treated everybody fairly and equally, we could do even much, much more in terms of cohesion, in terms of ensuring that we have a world where everyone can feel that they are treated with dignity and respect. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done. But lastly, I think as men, we have to hold each other accountable. I cannot sit by when I see my friend posting stuff in the social media about women that I know is wrong and is unacceptable. And I shouldn't do that just quietly. I should be able to say that kind of, narrative is wrong, it's unacceptable, it cannot be condoned. The problem is that many of us men keep silent because it's supposedly not my business. And therefore, I will look the other way. The more we do that as men, the more we encourage this kind of vitriol, the bigotry, the violence that is visited on women every day. In a sense, we become part of the problem. So I do think that part of our work as Sonke Gender Justice is to challenge us as men to speak up, to stand up, and challenge each other so that we are held accountable for our actions at all times.
I agree, and I think it was such an important point. Whose story online is the topic or the center of censoring? The survivors, the advocates, not the actual perpetrators. And that isn't a technical choice, it's a social one. That's being made at organizations. And if, you know, the business legend Charlie Munger once said, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. The incentives on social media are enragement. And what algorithms have optimized for is that engagement, or enragement equals engagement. And those are social decisions with kind of their technical outcomes. But that can be switched. And that's the thing that keeps me optimistic. None of this is permanent. None of this is destiny. These are choices. Okay, so we're now going to actually hear from Sylvia Misogyny, who is the head of safety policy for Africa, the Middle East, and Turkey at Meta. So unfortunately, she was unable to join us here in person, but we wanted to see from her vantage point what trends they're seeing online when it comes to how this types of violence manifests, what have been the most effective technical interventions Meta has seen so far, and if Meta has any structural changes or initiatives in the pipeline aimed at further mitigating and preventing this type of violence. So we will hear from Sylvia now.
Good morning, my fellow panelists, esteemed guests, and experts on gender and ICTs. Thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity to speak at this very important event and on this very important topic. In my experience working on gender and technology, and as the head of safety policy for Africa, Middle East, and Turkey at Meta, I have seen firsthand the devastating impact of gender-based violence on online platforms. Unfortunately, we're seeing a growing trend of technology-assisted gender-based violence, including sextortion, non-consensual intimate images or NCII, and harassment of women public figures. At Meta, we take these forms of violence very seriously. We have implemented a range of policies and technologies to prevent and respond to these forms of violence. Our community standards prohibit sextortion, NCII, and harassment, and we use a combination of human reviewers and AI technology to detect and remove violating content. We also work closely with experts and organizations to develop new policies and programs to address these forms of violence. For example, we have partnered with the Southwest Grid for Learning to develop the stopncii.org platform. This is a platform that allows adults to report and remove intimate images without their consent, shared without their consent. The stopncii.org platform is designed to support victims of non-consensual intimate images abuse, and it works by generating a unique hash value from intimate images or videos, creating a digital fingerprint. The hash is then shared with participating tech platforms, including Meta, to identify and remove duplicate copies of the content without the image ever leaving the device of the person who has reported it. This ensures privacy and security while preventing the spread of NCII on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. We have also worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, to develop takeitdown.org platform. The takeitdown.org platform uses the same technology as Stop NCII to prevent the sharing of non-consensual intimate images of minors. Minors can report and have their images or intimate images removed on participating platforms. Both these platforms empower the users to take control of their intimate images and prevent unauthorized distribution across the internet. We recognize that there is more work to be done to address these forms of violence, and that's why we are committed to continuing to invest in new technologies and programs to prevent and respond to gender-based violence on our platforms. In conclusion, gender-based violence is a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach. At Meta, we are committed to doing our part to create safer digital spaces for all our users, and particularly women and girls. Thank you.
Great, and I think the reality is we do need the social media companies and companies that own platforms a part of the conversation. So sometimes it can be challenging to hear because we think, okay, just make this change. But the reality is we do need their voices. They're the ones that have big structural control. So it is important that they're a part of the dialogue. Nadine, your organization has shown that when it comes to combating gender-based violence, technology can also be a part of the solution. So can you share more about this? How can we leverage technology in this way, including what your organization has learned from the study that it conducted with the dating app Bumble?
Yeah, absolutely. So Chen is a tech nonprofit that works to produce resources and services of support for survivors of any form of gender-based violence. So our work is global. The team is fully remote. But we have a few countries that we kind of concentrate on due to the languages that we're able to produce our resources in. Our kind of flagship product for survivors is something called Bloom, which is a platform for healing. So it's fully online. You can create a profile and you can access videos on topics such as reclaiming your body after sexual assault, how to recover from toxic and abusive relationships, dealing and processing with the impacts of image-based abuse. We also have grounding exercises, we've got reflective activities that kind of support that, and we have a one-to-one messaging service as well, which connects you with our team of survivors and allies across the world. So yeah, what we're really trying to think about in the recent years is not just how we can use technology to kind of advance and expand our reach of support, but also how we can transform mindsets and feelings about using technology, especially as a way to heal from harms that were themselves perpetrated using technology. And I think that is, it's a very challenging question, especially for survivors who have experienced a lot of abuse online, right? And have put themselves out there and found that it's something that then has backfired. It's really difficult to rebuild that trust. And in a way, it's a lot for us to take on, to ask people to rebuild that trust when we don't have control over all of the social media platforms and lots of the policies that are being produced. So what we really focus on at Chen is hope, and is this idea that you kind of referred to before, Sinead, that everything is developing all the time and things are that means that it's possible to change things all the time. And so that's what we really try and focus on at Chen is, okay, when there's emerging technologies such as AI, we can hear loads about how deep fakes is then affecting survivors and how that is forming a part of the abuse. Let's start to think about just as quickly and in parallel how we can start to use those technologies also as a way to heal. So as you referred to, we've got a partnership with Bumble, the dating app, and that is with our program Bloom. So this platform, this portal that survivors can log into and find ways to heal and connect with others online. We now offer that to the member community at Bumble. So if you are somebody who experienced abuse or assault online whilst using the Bumble app, or as a result of meeting somebody on the Bumble app, if you then go and report that to Bumble, they will follow their procedures in terms of investigating or blocking those perpetrators, but they'll also offer the option for people to log into our Bloom platform and find resources to help them heal. So this has been really interesting for us, not only because it really expands our reach, and it's really important for us that we are reaching survivors in all parts of the world, but also because of the amount of it allows us to learn about the experiences, particularly of a group who is very much online. So we ran a study with the community at Bumble, completely optional. We posted a survey and said, hey, we want to hear about your experiences of online dating and particularly abuse on online dating. Within a week, we'd got 60,000 responses from their community, and I would say when we set up the survey, we were expecting more like 8,000. So it really blew up, and it was fascinating and also humbling to see how many survivors were willing to share their stories with us. But of those 60,000 people using the Bumble app, over 50% had experienced online abuse. And I think one of the particularly interesting things for us with the partnership is we've had the partnership for 3 years, and we ran a survey in 2021, albeit on a smaller scale. But when we asked if people had experienced tech abuse in 2021, about 20% said yes. And when we asked in 2023, it jumped right up to over 55%. And that could indeed be that more and more people are experiencing tech abuse. But the key difference that we made in our survey was when we asked the second time in 2023, we said, here are forms of tech-facilitated abuse. Have you experienced any of these? And we really believe that that is what got so many people understanding and connecting the dots, because actually what we've learned from speaking to our survivor community is even just recognizing that what you have experienced is tech-facilitated gender-based violence is a really big part of the challenge at the moment.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of optimism in that. Then there's also a lot of concern that it has become so normalized that many survivors didn't even recognize it as abuse. It's just seen as par for the course. And that's why I think partnerships and alliances are so vital, because the incentives are different. So you went in with your own incentives. This is what we're trying to solve and optimize for, not necessarily just connecting people, but doing that safely. And we can see in the results and in the data. So we're going to hear from Honorable Neema Langari, who is a Member of Parliament in Tanzania. And unfortunately, she was unable to join us in person, but she's graciously sent in a video statement. And I think it's important to hear her voice, because we're seeing online gender-based violence play out in the political arena. And that's having a direct impact on democratic participation, especially for women, and self-censoring. So we wanted to hear it from her as well, what the experience has been like, and then what are some initiatives policymakers are launching or are working on that can be effective. So we will cue the video.
I have spent the last 4 to 4.5 years of my first term in Parliament advocating and raising awareness on the sheer and the magnitude of the technology-facilitated gender-based violence on women in politics. I say women in politics because it has a detrimental impact on our democracy. More and more women are deciding to self-censor. They're deciding not to be online. And by doing so, it is shrinking the democratic space in relation to the participation of women in politics. But I'm so pleased that all the hard work, the effort, the echoing of the magnitude of this challenge has paid off. Now, what does this say? As community, as stakeholders, we need to come together and have robust legislative process. But most importantly, we need to find ways to capacitate parliamentarians, to capacitate women in politics, so that we can strengthen our own digital resilience and make sure that we don't resort to self-censoring. Now, on a different side, exciting news, on 17th of October, at the Interparliamentary Union, which is the parliament of parliaments, more members of parliament from 180 parliaments in the world passed a landmark resolution, the IPU resolution on the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And I was very much honored to be the co-rapporteur alongside my colleague, Honorable Michelle from Canada. What does this resolution mean? It means that 180 parliaments are now going to work on how to ensure that there is safe use of artificial intelligence. How can we harness the benefits of artificial intelligence whilst mitigating the risks And one of the biggest risks of AI is a deepfakes misinformation that impacts women in politics a lot. So I hope those of you who are there will find ways to collaborate so that we can ensure that this IPU AI resolution comes to life. Thank you.
Great, and with that, we are going to turn to audience questions before going back to the panel. So if you do have a question, we do have some mic runners, so feel free to just raise your hand and we will come to you. If there's a specific panelist that you want to address your question to, feel free to do that. Otherwise, share your question with the room and we will answer it accordingly.
Hi. Well, hi, my name is Marcela. I come from Mexico. And, well, I'm part of a movement, Ley Olimpia, which does legal reforms in Latin America regarding this digital violence. And one of my, well, yes, my question is, if we're starting from the point that tech is not neutral, why do we keep on calling it tech-facilitated gender-based violence if it is not, in the same concept, it's like we're talking about a neutral tool because it's only, the violence is only facilitated by tech, and then we lose all the responsibility of companies, platforms, the patriarchal algorithm, if we just say that the violence is facilitated by the tool, such as if it was like scissors that you can decide to use to harm someone or to cut a paper. It's not the same when we talk about technology because there's all this interest behind, because the patriarchal algorithm enriches some, like the owners of the platforms. So to keep on calling it tech-facilitated gender-based violence, I think it's in the concept has a contradiction. Yes, well, that's what from our movement we stand for. And in Latin America, all the laws that we've launched in Mexico, in Argentina, in Panama, in Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, we call it digital violence because it's like the space where we exist, the use of tech, emerging and digital. It's like this scope where human beings interact and relate to each other. It's like another space, just as home, school, and, well, just wanted to point at it. Thank you.
I don't know if anyone wants to jump in as a panelist.
Marcelo, it's lovely to see you. I think we use the word tech. I mean, not all tech is bad. Like, if tech is designed in a way that is safe and ethical and is designed for women, by women, that's a good tech product. It doesn't necessarily facilitate violence. And I think that's the hope we're talking about. It's possible for us to redesign technology to bring us the world we want and not the world we have. I think it's possible. I think we just have to work out how to get there. And I think in terms of the terminology, tech-facilitated gender-based violence, if we talk about digital abuse, then we're then removing the gendered nature of that violence. It is women and girls who are experiencing this disproportionately. So I think it's really important that we make sure that the gender-based component of this is maintained and is headlined. But I'm happy to talk more about how that's reflected in law and policy as well.
I think there was another question closer to the front.
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much to all of you. That was beautiful interventions to listen to. My name's Megan, I'm from Brands on a Mission. I was really curious when hearing you describe your different thoughts. I was thinking about sort of the beginning, and we know that femtech is massively underfunded. We know we have massive underrepresentation of women in STEM, women from low middle income contexts. So what interventions can we put in place to really start this from the beginning and not just further down the chain? Thank you.
I can start because I've got the mic, but I'm sure others, Nadine, you would have much to say about it. But I mean, there is a whole movement around safety by design, and that is making sure that, and from a GBV perspective, making sure that all of our GBV programming principles are embedded in the design of technology. The same way we embed that in design of our programming. There's do no harm approaches, for example. There's confidentiality. One of the biggest issues we've had with femtech is that it's collecting unbelievably sensitive data. These tech apps are collecting menstrual cycles of 13-year-old girls. I mean, it's really sensitive and potentially very harmful data. And so this safety by design, we call it safety, security, privacy by design, is a process where at the very beginning of tech design, so ideation stage, not when we're already in the design stage, but way back when we're thinking through the ideas, you embed these principles of safety, security, and privacy. And then it is possible to mitigate those harms. We have a guidance on the safe and ethical use of technology for gender-based violence, and that speaks specifically to gender-based violence and harmful practices technologies. What is the role of a GBV practitioner, or in the case of femtech and a sexual reproductive health practitioner, what is your role? What do you want that technology product for? And what is the role of the tech company? Because if you stand as a practitioner and hand the brief over to the tech company and say, hey, can you design an app that does A, B, C, and D? You lose control of where the data's collected. Are our survivors being supported? Is it safe and ethical? And is their confidentiality being supported through that app? So, yeah, safety, security, privacy by design, it's possible. And I think that's where, you know, this idea of hope comes into everything we do. I'm sure, Nadine, you have more to add on.
Yeah, that was really well said. And at Chen, we've got a similar set of principles that we call our trauma-informed design principles. They're available online, but we've really embedded these at Chen in the design process of everything we do. And I'm talking not just ideating about how we begin to develop the services of support, but literally when we are designing web pages, when we are picking the third-party tools that we're going to work with, when we are deciding on our own internal HR policies, we use these principles, which are things like safety and privacy, but also things like plurality and power sharing as well. And so making sure that, yeah, that's at the heart of everything is key. The other point that's, I think, really important is talking about this stuff and sharing it. So again, at Chen, all of the code that we produce, and I guess we do have the privilege of being the designers, the users, and also the technology builders in our in-house team, because we are a team of survivors, led by survivors for survivors, and our volunteer community is a big part of what we do as well. But all of the code that we produce is open source, so anybody who wants to be able to produce the same technologies or the same methods of support that we have, we make sure that's available freely online. And then I also feel very passionately that it's one thing to put code out there and say it's open source, but we also really try and explain what we've done, and so that people can follow the same steps, can learn from our mistakes, and figure out how, you know, whatever it was, the testing of a WhatsApp service, the things that we can apply from that learning to other kinds of contexts. So for us as well, that's a key way of making sure that a lot of this stuff happens really at the beginning of designing.
Oh, great. And feel free to introduce yourself or kind of share a bit about yourself as you share your question. Okay, great.
Hi. My name is Toby from the Prevention Collaborative. I was just thinking about potential opportunities to integrate, like, ways we are addressing TFGBV online to existing programs offline. For example, engaging men and boys, and programs that address, you know, mental health or other programs and strategies to address GBV offline, if there are like potential opportunities to just integrate ways and strategies we are addressing TFGBV online.
Yes, I think we should make those linkages. In fact, I think I was in one of the Scandinavian countries where they argue that technologically inspired violence is not a new form of violence. It's just moving violence from physical space to technology. And our interventions need, therefore, to acknowledge that the same violence we see in technology is a violence that women experience, every day, except that it's now taken to, technological spaces. I do think that when we make those linkages, it ensures that there's a seamless ensuring that we use the same messages, we are all alive to what are the issues, how they play themselves out, and our interventions are therefore coherent and ensuring that we are sustaining the intervention so that it actually turns the tide against any form of violence wherever it is happening, and that there's no tolerance for it, in any space.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And one example that I'm so fortunate to have in my life is many of the women astronauts that are my friends are trailblazers within their own communities. So they receive lightning in their own unique ways. So what we've done is we have our WhatsApp group, and then I know that's still technically online, but we also, when we receive trolls, we actually help each other come up with clapbacks, and we rally against one another. And also we are there for each other. So things from clapbacks like, I can't hear you from space, or things like, come get your sandwich in space if you can, because we get a lot of that, to literally us being together and being in each other's company. We have a retreat where we talk about these things, and we also share with each other offline who the perpetrators are, so we know, and it's building that solidarity so that we don't put these people on panels, so that we can protect the other women within our industry. And so those are ways in which we take, as you've mentioned, the violence is physical to online, but also taking it from online and making sure we protect people in the physical world.
And we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Paula Majumdar. My question is, so in terms of GBV prevention, regulatory practices are often pretty behind because governments aren't really aware of some of the newer advancements in tech. So how can we be more proactive instead of reactive in terms of regulation?
I think it's about how laws and policies are designed, and I think you need really strong regulation, but you also need flexible regulation, and it's a balance. And I don't think governments are unfamiliar with, changing spaces. I come from a policy background, so I think when we were regulating drugs, every day different drugs are emerging on the market, and how do governments regulate it? And there are ways of doing it within different countries. I think the issue we have with technology is at the rapid pace of it and the way in which old technologies are being used in new ways, but also understanding, or embedding issues like safety by design at the regulatory as a component of regulation. So making sure that women are part of tech design processes, you can regulate that, and that's already a risk mitigation strategy in place. Probably one of the global gold standards around regulation is the E-Safety Commissioner in Australia, and they are an independent regulator, but they embed not just regulation for incidents of harm, but they also provide a community-based education programs for all ages and for all different needs. But then they also have a big safety by design program. So they help and they work with tech companies to embed that safety by design from the beginning. So you have that kind of prevention component from the beginning.
And I know there was a mic pass, so feel free to share your question if we can make it really quick.
Yes,
Thank
mine
you.
is very quick. Hi, my name is Vui, and I'm from Nakosa in South Africa. So my question is to any of you. What are you doing or how are you working with Department of Education? Because we know that most departments have moved to online schooling and kids are exposed to more tech than they were in our times. So what are you currently doing with that? Because that's my greatest concern.
I can start because I've got the microphone, but I'm sure my colleagues have more to say. But I think a couple of things. One, again, making sure the platforms are safe. So making sure that you have students understand how the platform works, how it can be abused. If there's anyone in this world who understands how technology can be manipulated, it's young people, our digital nativists, you know. So I think putting it to the test, making sure we're undertaking threat modeling in the platforms that young people are engaging with. Programming digital literacy among young people and making sure that that's a really critical component of standard education curriculums is increasingly important. And I would also say around schools, making sure that parents are aligned and involved. You know, how do we want our children collectively engaging in technology? Because peer pressure is real among young people. One child has a phone and then everyone wants a phone. How do we as parents and a school collectively make decisions around that? And we have seen some really great examples of that happening. There's also some studies around about the experience of TFGBV among tertiary students and what that looks like and what key strategies around safe schools can be too. I hope that answers your question. But departments of education are a critical partner alongside your departments of women and communities.
Okay, so with that, maybe in kind of 30 seconds or less, if there was one piece of advice that you would share with the room or recommendation or aspiration that we can all do as a society to move towards unfollowing misogyny, what would that be? And we can...
I'm not sure.
I think you said it, unfollow misogyny. I think that it's both hurtful to see these comments, but also so painful when I experience this sexual harassment and the people that are supposed to support me just stand by and don't do anything. And I think you spoke to that so well. It's a second form of betrayal that is often even more painful. So yes, please unfollow these people because our follows and likes absolutely have power in the attention economy, and it is so important that we speak up.
I think part of our problem also is our socialization models. I find parents very strange in that we teach our children these differentiations. You know, we buy guns for boys, we buy dolls for girls, which for me, that's where the problem starts, because we are already ingratiating a norm that says there's this differentiation, and when there are chores at home, girls must clean, the boys must go and play outside. It encourages this kind of behavior, which I think we end up then with the problems that we see. Many of us say to our boys, don't cry. You know, what are we saying? You know, all human beings have got emotions. We all, at some point, feel pain and vulnerable. And when we say to boys, suppress your emotion, we are actually creating a dangerous human being. Because at some point, as we all know, you can't suppress your emotions all the time. At some point, it's going to explode. So I think we do need to look at our socialization models, because what that also feeds into is this notion of, you know, misogyny that starts even in our homes, how we speak about women, the kind of jokes that we make, which sometimes we think it's a light moment, but we actually are spreading certain messages to our children. So I do think that there's a lot that we need to do to really turn the tide and say, how do we, particularly for boys, how do we begin to engender particular norms that say it's important to respect, to treat people with dignity, not to harm, and not to pretend to be stronger than you actually are, to accept that you also may be vulnerable at some moments. Because once we begin to do that, we demystify this myth that, you know, men are supposed to be all pervasive, all powerful at all times and in all circumstances. And we need to share stories like, I mean, I'm quite fascinated. She's an astronaut. You know, many of our children know astronauts to be men. You know, how do we share those stories of success of women who are also trailblazers in many spheres of life so that we really change the narrative? You know, I was in the US one year. I think Clinton was running against Trump the first time. And listening to the debate there, I was quite amazed how American men were bold to say, iron my shirt, bring me a beer. You know, as if that is the only thing that they can say about women. You know, and that it's the right thing to say that in a public space or even in a private space. I think there's a lot that we need to address around things that we take as normal in society, which actually we should not normalize, because that advances misogyny as if it's a normal thing to do.
I think for us it's really about how can we stay online? How can we make online a space where survivors or women or you know do feel safe online? With our study with Bumble that I mentioned earlier, we found that 80% of people who had experienced abuse online then felt less safe in all areas of online. So if they'd experienced abuse on the dating app, they were feeling less safe on everything. And that's mobile banking, that's in their messaging platforms. We also found that 25% said that they had stopped using some of the apps that they had been using before. And I think for us, you know, that's terrifying, because essentially what we're seeing is a mass silent retreat of women and non-binary people from online spaces. And if those voices disappear from online spaces, then what's going to happen is that space is going to become full of more perpetrators and more harms. So I think for us, the message is really, what can we do to make online feel like a safe and hopeful space that survivors, women, and non-binary people feel like they can belong to?
Now I have the advantage of going after everyone else. I would say huge investment in digital literacy. I think until we really understand the products that we pick up and use all of the time, it's going to be really, really difficult for us to be able to champion together to address the issue. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Thank you so much, and I'll kind of quickly add, as a futurist, the future isn't a mystery. So I know it feels like technology is moving quite quickly, but we know where things are directionally headed. So on the one hand, it's never too late to make existing technology as the foundation safer, but we do have to lean into where it's going, spot those trends so we can feel like things are moving in a preventative direction, not just reactive. That is part of the work that I do with policymakers or with the Department of Education. Where are we headed? So it doesn't feel like we're playing whack-a-mole. We know that our institutions were designed to move slow, and there's a safety in that. But it also, I think we can all feel it, it is time to have newer, flexible, adaptive models to the time that we're in. And I know that it feels like things are moving too quick to catch up, but that also means the solutions can as well. Because the inherent benefit when talking about technology is that we're talking about software. Software can be changed and remodeled in as instant as an update. Those solutions are at our disposal. We just have to lean into them. And along with things like digital literacy is also conversations about digital hygiene. How do we make sure the things that we're sharing, we're not involuntarily sharing extra data about our location and things like photos, empowering people with the knowledge to know that you can search your information online and ask for things to be removed. These are all aspects and tools and solutions that are at our disposal, but it has to be a part of the conversation around understanding, learning, and keeping safe online. I would like to thank our expert panelists for, first of all, their fierce advocacy, but also generously sharing it with all of us. And thank you so much for joining us here today. This is one of many dialogues, but I'm honored to be a part of it and for us to continue to move the frontier forward on this issue. So thank you so much, and thanks to